And at that stage, the United States had no desire whatsoever to intervene on behalf of the little democracies and against that big dictatorship of Hitler. But we all know that the United States would get involved in the war. But actually the way they got involved in the war was, as one American historian, Stephen Ambrose, has put it, they sort of backed into the war. They sort of stumbled into the war. They did not choose to enter the war deliberately. They actually accidentally stepped into the war, so to speak. And it happened because the Japanese attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor, as everybody knows. Right? And we know that the next day the United States declared war on Japan. Fair enough, and that would have led to a different war in the Pacific and the Far East than the war being fought in Europe, which was between Great Britain and in the meantime the Soviet Union and Germany. There could have been sort of two world wars. But the only reason why they merged to become one single world war is because 4 days after Pearl Harbor, Hitler declared war on the United States. It's wrong to think, as many people do, that Roosevelt, the United States, declared war on Germany after Pearl Harbor, because actually Germany had nothing to do with Pearl Harbor. After Pearl Harbor, the United States declared war on Japan alone and not on Germany. Germany was not involved. And it's also wrong to believe, as some historians do, that Germany had an obligation to come to the aid of its Japanese ally. And that is not true, because Germany was only committed to help Japan if Japan was attacked by a third country. But that was not the case at Pearl Harbor. Japan attacked a third country. It was not attacked by a third country. So Germany had no obligation whatsoever to come to the aid of Japan. But Hitler did. 4 days after Pearl Harbor, on the 11th of December, he declared war on the United States. Which raises the question, if Hitler wouldn't have declared war on the United States, when would the United States have declared war on Germany? Possibly never at all. Possibly would never ever come to the aid of the little democracies and the oppressed countries and occupied countries of Europe. But they did, and that raises the question why Hitler did declare war on the United States on December the 11th, 1941. And the answer actually is to be found by looking at the situation of the German army in Russia at that time. In June 1941, Germany had attacked the Soviet Union. And they confidently believed at that time in Berlin that the war against the Soviet Union would last 6 to 8 weeks. Within 2 months it would be over. And it was very important for Germany that that be the case. Because at that stage, Germany only had about fuel left to wage war for about another 4 months. So within 4 months they had to defeat the Soviet Union in order to lay their hands on the oil-rich regions of the Caucasus. And if they would have done so, Germany would have been able to carry on the war forever against any major power in the world. Because the big weakness of Germany was the lack of raw materials, especially the lack of oil, right? So the war against the Soviet Union for Hitler was very important in many ways. It was important because Hitler's big dream, his mission in life, was the destruction of the Soviet Union, the cradle of the revolution, the cradle of communism. But also, grabbing the Soviet Union would have meant giving Germany, a major industrial power, plenty of raw materials it needed. The rich farmlands of the Ukraine, for example, and the oil fields of the Caucasus. These were the big prizes to be won in Russia. So Germany had to win fast because oil supplies had been dwindling already in 1940 and early 1941. So the war at first went well, but by August, September, October, it became clear that Germany did not have an easy time in the Soviet Union, that the resistance of the Soviets was much tougher than expected. And the catastrophe happened for Germans on the 5th of December 1941, which is when the Red Army counterattacked in front of Moscow and actually gave Hitler's armed forces a big bloody nose. And that same day, the generals reported to Hitler in Berlin that he had to lose the war, that we were going to lose the war because we're now stuck in the Soviet Union in the middle of the winter. We're on the defensive now. We have no hope in hell of winning anymore this year, and we're out of fuel. Even trying again next year is going to be very, very difficult. There's no more element of surprise, and the Soviets are still very, very strong. And that's the reason why many historians think that Hitler declared war on the United States on December 11, 1941. He was desperately looking for a solution. He thought that by declaring war, without having to do so, against the enemy of his Japanese friends, that he might somehow cause the Japanese to reciprocate by declaring war on his enemy, the Russians. And that would have meant that the Japanese army, which was in China at the time, would have attacked the Soviets in the area of Vladivostok and forced the Soviet Union on a two-front war. And then, maybe, just maybe, Germany might still have had a chance to win the war against the Soviet Union. But that gamble didn't pay off, because we all know that Japan said thank you very much to Hitler for declaring war on the United States. But Japan did not reciprocate with a declaration of war against the Soviet Union. And as a result of that, Hitler had to carry on alone in his war against the Soviet Union, a war he was going to end up losing. And in fact, it's fair to say that it is the Soviet Union that defeated Nazi Germany, with the help, obviously, of the Americans, the British, the Canadians. It took contributions from all the Allies to defeat Nazi Germany, which was a very, very powerful and militarily mighty country. But a major contribution was undoubtedly made by the Soviet Union. But to come back for a moment to the American corporate connection, you might say, with Nazi Germany. After Pearl Harbor then, or at least 4 days after Pearl Harbor, the United States is officially at war with Nazi Germany. So what happened to the American investments, to the American branch plants in Germany? Well, the answer is business as usual. They kept on producing for Hitler. They kept on producing weapons until the very end. And Hitler kept paying the bills until the very end. And actually, business continued to be very good. Ford, General Motors, IBM, ITT continued to make big profits in Nazi Germany even after Pearl Harbor. Officially, the headquarters in the United States lost control over operation in Germany. But that is actually only partly true. I give details about that in my book on the myth of the Good War. But the reality is that actually business continued, and these American corporations continued to do very, very well, thank you very much, until the very, very end of the war. And it's very likely, it's almost certainly not a coincidence, that while our bombers, the American and British bombers, bombed a lot of German cities like Cologne and Hamburg and Dresden, and destroyed old buildings galore and churches and cathedrals, that actually they hardly ever bombed the big factories of American branch plants in Germany, such as the big Ford factory, for example, on the banks of the Rhine in Germany, such as the plant of General Motors in Rüsselsheim. So at the end of the war, it's fair to say that actually Americans saved their investments in Germany and came out, with big, big investments still intact in Germany. And these companies, these businesses are still there today, still making very much money. Thank you very much. But the moral of the story is that the United States did not fight the war against Germany because they hated Nazism, they hated Hitler. They fought the war basically. First, they didn't want to fight against Hitler at all because they made lots of money thanks to Hitler. And later on, they made lots of money out of a war, fighting or providing both Hitler and his enemies, with equipment. So the war was a wonderful thing. And that's one of the lessons, I think, that we have to consider for the post-war period. The United States never had anything against Nazism and fascism. And today we see how in Ukraine, for example, the United States tolerate and even encourage and even support neo-Nazi elements, as they wage a struggle now against the Russians over there. And there seems to be nothing wrong with that as far as the Americans are concerned. Nazis are not a problem as far as we're concerned, seemingly, regrettably. And secondly, war is still very good for business. When the war ended, actually, many American economists were concerned that war would be the end of the good times. War would be the end of the boom, the wartime boom. And as a result of that, when the war ended, we had to find new wars. And that's why the Cold War was so wonderful, because the Cold War allowed the system to keep on functioning. The warfare system, as it's called, the Pentagon system, to keep working. That's the one of which Eisenhower later famously said, that it's the military-industrial complex that's profiting from all that. Well, indeed, he was right. The Cold War picked up the slack of the Second World War. And after the Cold War, the Gulf War. And after the Gulf War, the ultimate solution, war against terrorism, which means worldwide war, permanent war. And that's the great solution, so to speak, because as many people know, if peace would break out, it would be a catastrophe for the American economy.